A fuel choice that even rivals can agree on? Now that's worth the hype. Cheaper, cleaner, and homegrown. Pump it up with unleaded 88.
Let's rodeo at the Cinch World's Toughest Rodeo, January 10th and 11th at Wells Fargo Arena. It's rodeo and a whole lot more. Come early for autographs, pony rides, and more. See more action, the best entertainment, and be part of the fun. It's too great to wait. Get tickets now at HighVTix.com. It's wild, it's western, it's pro rodeo at the Cinch World's Toughest Rodeo, January 10th and 11th.
Scott Dochterman, Chad Leistikow, together on one pod, talking odds and all things Big Ten. Powered by GameDay Men's Health, with locations in Ankeny, West Des Moines, and North Liberty. From the Channel Seed Studios, this is Legends and Listeners, exclusively on Iowa Everywhere.
Hey, Hawkeye fans, Big Ten fans, and Iowans everywhere. It is Legends and Listeners on Iowa Everywhere. I'm Chad Leistikow of the Des Moines Register, joined by Scott Dochterman of The Athletic. Episode 66 in our venture together here, Scott. Coming to you live from the Channel Seed Studios. A short week for the Hawkeye football team, which improved to 6-3 with Saturday's 42-10 win over Wisconsin. Next up, Friday night at UCLA. So we're getting you this show early Thursday. Hope you got to listen soon. You can't wait till Saturday, Friday night game. But Scott, love having you on because I view you as a Iowa-Wisconsin history expert. I know you wrote for The Athletic, kind of the greatness of that 2010 game, for example. This thrashing, though, really was quite the deal in the Iowa-Wisconsin series. Where does this rank in terms of, I don't know, lopsided wins for Iowa, dominations of Wisconsin? It just doesn't happen that often.
Chad, you'd have to go back probably to those golden years where they, went from 77 to 97, where they were 18 or 17-0-1, I think, during that little span there. But I have not seen a game like that. I mean, 08 is probably the closest one. I think it was like 38-16, and Sean Green scored 4 touchdowns, and they really gave it to the Badgers. But that Badgers team wasn't like this. There were 329 rushing yards, and when you were looking at the offensive line, I have not seen anybody really do that to Wisconsin, let alone Iowa, for a long, long time. I mean, blowing them off the ball. So I would say this one was this one's off the charts for the Hawkeyes because they've won 4 out of 5 now, against them after suffering through a long decade. But I have not seen anything like this.
Yeah, there was that 28-7 game during the pandemic, but that, kind of topped it off with the late Tyler Goodson run there, and some of that was Amir Smith-Marset. It really was a line of scrimmage domination. And, I mean, just think about the 19 game that we both covered. I mean, Jonathan Taylor in Wisconsin ran for 300 yards against the Hawkeyes that day in Madison, and the day of the Nate Stanley car collision at the goal line. But that's 300, that was like – remember Iowa came out in a 4-4-3 that day and tried to stop it, and they just couldn't. They couldn't do it. And that's what it felt like for Wisconsin.
Yeah, I mean, I thought they should have went to 52 front, 5 linemen versus 5 linemen. That would have been much better. And I look at like the 17 game and how that turned out. It was 38-17 or 38-14, and both touchdowns were scored by Josh Jackson on interceptions. But even in the middle of the third quarter, it was like 17-14. Stanley threw a pretty nice pass, one of the few of the day, to Noah Fant, and it bounces off his hands. Otherwise, he might have 6. Despite being dominated. And then I think right after that, only a play or two later was when Stanley fumbled and Wisconsin recovered it, turned it for a touchdown. And then from then on, it was just the Zambonis out and get out of the way. And the other day it was the Zambonis out and is just running over squirrels, and that's pretty much what happened. in reverse. I thought this was even more dominant than that day with Jonathan Taylor, just because this Wisconsin team was on roller skates all game.
Yeah, it was really impressive. We could see it through our you forgot your binoculars. That's right. We could see it through the binoculars. The line of scrimmage was just moving early. I mean, I think Caleb Johnson had an 8-yard run off the gate. We don't like to rehash too much, but I thought a significant Iowa-Wisconsin win like that deserved a little historical perspective. And the only other game I'd mention would be the 2004 game, which I happened to attend in person. I flew back from D.C. To watch that game. Of course, they clinched the Big Ten title at Kinnick that day, 30-7. It wasn't like a dominant type game, but Iowa did put a hurting on a pretty good Wisconsin team that day. So it kind of flashed back to that a little bit for me too. 2008, 2004, and this one, honestly, were the only three I kind of came up with in the Ferentz era.
I'm there with you on that, because I think 2004 and I think first series of the game, very early, Drew Tate throws an interception. And I know Kirk was like, are you trying to get, he actually said this, he's like, are you trying to get, throw the game here or what?
We'll get to some throwing the game stuff later.
Go ahead. Later on, though, it was just, and it was all through the air, because they couldn't really run the football that year and stuff. So that one, but, those were two teams vying for a piece of the Big Ten championship, which kind of was that one and 10 were the most important games, I think, annals from these two programs. But this one to me, for Wisconsin on their end more than on Iowa's end, is we have to really look in the mirror and evaluate what we are as a program, because we just let one of our rivals dominate us and embarrass us, because we pride ourselves on being a physical team, and they took it all away from us. So now they're going to have, Luke Fickell was pretty mad after the game. I asked about Caleb Johnson point blank, and he's like, actually it was the offensive line that really impressed me the most, the way they were able to blow us off the ball. And I think, so I think this could be a turning point for Wisconsin in deciding what do they want to be identity-wise as a program, because they threw their identity down the drain.
Yeah, well put. I had a Luke Fickell topic on there, but you kind of hit it. It's, we are a Big Ten show as well, or at least we pride ourselves on that. I just wonder, where do you think the Luke Fickell hire stands at this point? I mean, that was the hot hire last year, Scott, in all of college football, and hey, you got to give Kirk Ferentz some credit here, because, these new coaches come in, Scott Frost, you name it, PJ Fleck, Luke Fickell, heck, Brett Bielema. I mean, he's been pretty good against Brett, other than one game where we won't. That's another one we can re-legislate at some point in our flashback shows. But really, his border rivals, coaches have come in and out, and Kirk keeps his thumb on these guys pretty good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And, you look at Fickell, and he took that step as a program to, we're going to change because we need to change in today's world. And so he went and hired Phil Longo, who's a really good offensive coordinator in North Carolina, to install more of an air raid, he had Drake May and Sam Howell at North Carolina. And they figured this is the kind of offense we want to run at Wisconsin. We want to be more multiple. In this day and age, you just have to do that. But it took something away, and you've got to fill that with something else. And they don't have that. I mean, their quarterback, unfortunately for them, Tanner Mordecai wasn't very good last year, and he got hurt. And then this year, Tyler Van Dyke was their guy, and he got hurt. But you look around the line of scrimmage, that's where it really matters. I mean, and I tweeted this, during the game, and a lot of people agreed with it. And then, of course, some Wisconsin fans started nitpicking at it. And that is that this is why you have to be careful when you mess with your identity, because Wisconsin was known for a generation and a half, from Barry Alvarez all the way through Paul Christ, as being a line of scrimmage team that was going to dominate you physically with these 340-pound monsters running power O, always pulling. And then defensively, when they had Jim Leonard and Dave Aranda was there, and Justin Wilcox is the DC there in the middle, they ran a 3-4. They had very active linebackers, always gap sound with great integrity, and they were able to tie up blockers up front, and then they'd have active defensive backs. And none of it translated to the defense. That looked really bad for Wisconsin. And their offense just doesn't have that punch that it once had. So now they've got to revisit and look in the mirror and say, is this the kind of identity you want as a program? Do you want to go to be an air raid? Can you fill it with good players? And even if you recruit 3 good receivers, are they going to be able to fit this scheme and the quarterback throw it? It's not Texas. And then conversely, let's apply it to this. Iowa, when it hires the next coach in 10 years, when Kirk finally steps down, do you want to go in a different direction? Do you want to do something different? Okay, well, be prepared, because sometimes you can't find 4-3 wide receivers in Iowa. And if you do, they're going somewhere else. They just are. Maybe you're an Alan Lazard and you get lucky because you're a legacy and you go to, or Keenan Davis and Cedar Rapids. Well, I wanted to stay at home. But Mario Manning, or not Mario Manning, and the other one, Antonio, or oh gosh, darn it, Arlington, Adrian Arrington went to Michigan. Yeah. Oliver Martin went to Michigan. Amara Darboh went to Michigan.
Right.
You just Michigan steals their life. It's kind of like Roy Williams with those basketball players.
Well, just to finish off, here's a quote from Luke Fickell after the game. He said, "This was kind of your worst nightmare, to be overtaken, manhandled, and dominated, especially in the second half." My God, what a quote for another coach to say about you. You should put that up in the Iowa offensive line room. Maybe they did, but that's one to frame. That's a pretty stellar quote, and tells you where Wisconsin's at right now. Before we get to the Hawkeyes a little more, Scott, I want to actually dig into the CFP rankings, and I have a little Hawkeye thread in here as well. But they came out on Tuesday night. Big Ten, 4 teams in the top 8. I just kind of want to get your reaction. Oregon 1, Ohio State 2, Penn State 6, Indiana 8. I think the national takeaway here has been Indiana kind of criminally underranked given what they've looked like on the field, but maybe you have you've covered them. So, and you covered Oregon as well, and Ohio State, frankly. Yeah. So what are your thoughts?
Of the 3 that I've seen in person, Indiana was the most impressive team. And I don't say that lightly, just because they won 56-7 doesn't mean that, because sometimes things go weird. The way they dominated Nebraska in every facet of that game, it was really impressive. They were just so smooth in how they did it. It was just, there was no way to stop them. And that's pretty much been the case for them all season. Now, everybody can say, well, that's Nebraska. Well, they're 5-4, and they almost beat Ohio State on the road. So let's give them a little bit of credit. And the other part for Indiana, it's not their fault that the 2 CFP finalists last year aren't very good. And now they play Michigan this week. It's still Michigan. So Indiana, may have some scar tissue there, the fans anyway, maybe not the players. But I thought that the rankings were right. I would have flipped Indiana and Penn State myself. I thought Penn State, they don't really have a win that stands out. They don't have a ranked win. And, I think their biggest win was Illinois, and then they're not going to have a ranked win the rest of the season unless Minnesota jumps in there, and which is possible. They've been playing pretty well, but still, so they're not. I know a lot of people were starting to, in our place, were like, why is BYU at 9 and Penn State's at 6? Look at their strength of schedule and all that. I'm like, well, they do look a little better than BYU, but I would say that that's fine. And frankly, I'll tell you what, if you're using the eye test, how could you overlook Iowa for being like in the low 20s?
Right. Well, and that's kind of one thing I wanted to circle back to here, because Iowa unranked, obviously. And I wanted to ask you this because Iowa State is 7-1, beat Iowa, is number 17 in the rankings. Even if so, I just wonder if Iowa had beaten Michigan State. What if Iowa was 7-2 and had beaten Michigan State based on the rankings? I don't know. I'm not going to read off 1 through 25, but I know most of you guys out there are football fans and probably have looked at these things. I mean, there's not really I mean, I didn't think like Iowa State was underranked there. So, but where do you think Iowa would be at 7-2 right now? Just hypothetically, then I'll continue where I'm going with this.
I think they might be 21.
Okay.
Maybe 20, somewhere in there. I thought Kansas State was too high, by the way. I mean, they lost to a 4-5 team, and then they lost to BYU 38-9, and they're still 19th. So I would have put them ahead of. I think they're better than Kansas State, but I do think that they would have been somewhere in 21, and part of that is they're tied for 4th in the Big Ten in scoring. So forget the drive for 325. I mean, they're averaging almost 31 points a game. And in 5 out of their 6 home games, they've scored at least 38 points. That's pretty impressive. And then, their margin of victory in those 6 wins, 26 points. So they're dominating in victory. And Sagarin rating has Iowa 16, and ESPN's S&P rating has them 17th. So they're seen through different eyes as pretty impressive. So I think if they win this week decisively, then I think they need to be in there because they are not only ascending, but outside of, one half of 2 games and then 1 full game, they've been pretty impressive.
Yeah. Where I was kind of going with some of this was just like, as you see these rankings unfold, it is going to, I mean, like 10-2, I was saying all along, I didn't know if that would be enough with Iowa's schedule unless they were like really impressive, which they kind of have been, honestly. So maybe they could have gotten there. So all I'm saying is like, I just wonder if they were 7-2, if they would have a shot. I almost think it would be really hard to crack that top 12, given what the committee, has done. I mean, they have a 2-loss Alabama in there. It's just going to be hard to jump in Notre Dame with that loss to Northern Illinois. I mean, as long as they went out, they're clearly going to be in, right? Mm-hmm. So, and I don't know how great their wins are. I mean, I guess Texas A&M, but I guess it's just my point being is the 10-2 might not have even been good enough for Iowa. So that's why I'm not like crazy bent out of shape about not making the playoff. I realize that's what everyone wanted, but like it's just going to be really hard to make the playoff unless you're a blue blood. And I feel like Indiana even got dinged. I mean, Iowa State's 7-1 and 17th. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Now, but anyway, and I'm saying 7-2 with the Michigan State win because I don't think you can read legislate. The Iowa State one you just screwed up and got beat, but the Michigan State one you didn't show up. So that's the one I think you could have fixed, but.
Yeah, you're right. That one was a winnable game that apparently the practices weren't very good, and it came up to bite them. And that night, when you have a committed team with good athletes, that's sometimes it just those things happen. And I do agree that even if they were sitting here 7-2 with 35-7 being the final score at Ohio State and 1 point loss to Iowa State, that they would not be in a position to probably break through. Now, if the loss or if they would have beaten Iowa State, that might have changed some things, but not with the Michigan State. The other thing is like Iowa State is 17, which I think speaks to the eye test more than it does the resume, because the 3 SEC teams directly in front of them, A&M, LSU, and Ole Miss, they all have losses to teams that aren't yet qualified for the bowls. A&M got beat by 10 points by Notre Dame, but then got beat by 24 by South Carolina, who is a really good team. I will say this, that they would be with Iowa for the 5th best team in the Big Ten. But they're 5-4. And then you look at LSU lost to USC in the very beginning of the season. They're 4-5. And then Ole Miss lost to 3-6 Kentucky at home. Yeah. And so you've got those things, and then Iowa State's behind them. So, well, what is it? Name recognition, conference affiliation, yes, but also eye test, because Iowa State kind of got touched, got close to the fire and got burned. The UCF game was a game where they easily could have lost, and so they finally, kind of that happened. So now they've got to learn from it. But they're not in a position, Chad, to to become an at-large team if they do
Right.
not at this point.
They would have
lost
to
their
win.
opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. It's weird. There's like a Louisville randomly a 3-loss team at 22. So it's just kind of weird rankings. No other Big Ten teams outside of Indiana, and Iowa probably is the 5th best team right now in the Big Ten as we see, at least as I see it. Would you agree? Yeah. I mean,
yes, no question.
So I kind of thought they might be ranked based on the impressiveness of the wins, but they weren't. No big deal, but just kind of curious. Shout out to GameDay Men's Health. GameDay Men's Health is your go-to for testosterone replacement therapy. Can help you feel like you're in your 20s again. Calibrating your T levels can put you in a better mood, gives you stronger sex drive, gives you more energy, gives you a boost on the field or in the workout room or on the treadmill. It's time to get the treadmills going if it's almost winter time here. GameDay Men's Health can also help you with weight loss. Consultations free, easy, simple, privacy, no obligation. Check them out at GameDayMen'sHealth.com or call one of their locations in Ankeny, West Des Moines, or North Liberty. Also, feel free to tell them you heard about them from Chad and Scott on Legends and Listeners. I think they like us a lot, Scott. We send them some business, and they seem appreciative every time I go in. And so, and we like doing it. It makes a difference for me. So I appreciate them. Let's talk some Rose Bowl, Scott. The Hawks are going to the Rose Bowl. Not the Rose Bowl game, but they are going to the Rose Bowl to play in the Rose Bowl. Thoughts on that, just before I get into kind of my topic here? Like, significant?
It's significant now, because we know what this meant and has meant to these teams from the Big Ten for generations to go to the Rose Bowl. That was, from the mid 40s through the late 90s and even beyond that, to go to the Rose Bowl meant something. It was an accomplishment. It was the ultimate goal. The national championship was great, but it was always about going to the Rose Bowl. And, we got to experience it, the actual game, gosh, a long time ago now, Chad. I mean, almost 9 years ago. Ugh. But, you can't buy that experience to see that field, to see the marquee, to see the sunset over the San Gabriel Mountains, and then to see Christian McCaffrey run up and down the field 50 times. But it still conjures up those memories. I mean, Indiana went there this year, and that was exciting for them. They had sold a lot of tickets. I know when I talked to Martin Jarman, the AD for UCLA in the summer, he was like, "Yeah, our request for Iowa game is really is really off the charts because we're getting more than we would have from any of the former Pac-12 teams, for instance, because it was just another stadium and a venue for them. And for Iowa, it's special, and Iowa hasn't won there since our parents were kids. So I'm sure I imagine you've got something on this."
Yeah, this, I'm just thinking about my dad. It would have been 13 at the time. He's almost 80 now. It's been 66 years since the Hawkeyes have won a game in the Rose Bowl. And again, this isn't the Rose Bowl, but like you said, it means a lot to go there. Even Iowa players, like I talked to Deontay Craig the other day. Growing up in the Midwest, you watch Big Ten games and you watch the Rose Bowl. Like it doesn't just mean a lot to people our age. Like it means a lot to these young men too. Now we'll see if that changes as with the playoff era and that kind of thing. It's not the same now, but it still is meaningful. And so I think it's cool that I was going out there. And I think it means. Listening to Kirk Ferentz talk about it the other day, I think it means a lot to him. He has 202 wins, Scott, as the University of Iowa head coach. He's had one chance in these 26 years to win a Rose Bowl as a head coach, but he also had 2 chances as an assistant coach to win a Rose Bowl, including in his very first year. Mm-hmm. I'm surprised we didn't get a 1981 reference, I think, this week. But he's 0-3, and I think he would like to scratch that off his box, scratch that itch, check it off his box, whatever you want to say. And I think, like you said, I think there's going to be a ton of Hawkeye fans there, and it's going to feel it's going to feel special, even though it's an Iowa UCLA regular season game. I do believe that, and I do believe it would mean a lot to Kirk to win this game.
You're right. I think it would mean a lot for everybody because, this is a year where it is a little disappointing. You're not going to be in the playoff competition, but I think most people have kind of accepted that. And they've, now when you see what they've done the last couple of weeks, it's like, okay, you can get behind this team. You can be excited again. And to go to the Rose Bowl, I mean, I get goosebumps thinking about the Rose Bowl, Chad. I mean, that is like must-see TV for me all these years on January 1st. And it's not the same anymore because it's part of the playoff, but it kind of still is because it's the same part of the day, same venue. But Iowa in the Rose Bowl, I mean, we grew up as kids. We watched Iowa, from 1981. I mean, what were we in, first grade or second grade? I can't remember. 85, we were in sixth grade, and then we were juniors in high school the last time they went under Hayden Fry. I guarantee, know exactly where we were when we watched those three games and know how we felt after those results. And, in 16, we were sitting next to each other, and the game was pretty much over the first play of scrimmage. But
oh, man.
But
it was cool to be there. It was cool to be there.
It was great to be there.
I walked down on the field before the game. And
I nerded out. I got there 4.5 hours before kickoff. And I'm like, I remember turning to Mark, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna nerd out for a little bit on the field and walk out. And we had our pictures taken and everything on the field. And then, before we got into the game environment, but it's special. To me, I think the two most special views in sports in this country are the blooming of the azaleas at Augusta for the Masters, and then when the sun sets over the San Gabriel Mountains, in the Rose Bowl, and it's perfect, and Iowa gets to experience that, and that's special, and I feel good for the people who will be able to do that.
Yeah, so it's a 6:00 local time kickoff. So I assume if you get there a little early, you're going to see some kind of sunset, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, I would hope I'd hope if you're going to go to that game, that's not like IU or Minnesota, where maybe you go to a sports bar and then kind of sneak in 15 minutes before kickoff. This is one you're going to want to be at for a little while and celebrate.
Yeah, so I put out a question earlier this week, just kind of curious because I figured it might tell us some of the, might tell us a little demographics, honestly, of our of our listeners. Which of the 4 Rose Bowl losses haunt you the most? Because let's be honest, Scott, in all 4 games, Iowa has not only lost but laid an egg. I mean, 28-0 to Washington in 82 or the 81 season, 82. I'll just say the year of the game, okay? The 82 Rose Bowl. I don't remember that one that much. I remember where I was, but I was 7, So 86, I remember 86 Rose Bowl. I mean, that was a scarring game for fans. That was a great Iowa team. I'm gonna call up the box actually while we're talking. And that was clearly when I think we got dozens and dozens and dozens of responses, but that was clearly the number one most scarring game because that was the best team. Maybe, I mean, honestly,
in our lifetime.
It probably is the best team in our lifetime. I mean, 02 was good, but
02 would be the other one, but
yeah. I mean, they were 3 in the country. Ronnie Harmon, 4 first half fumbles. I just went back and watched those before our show, and they were first one especially was no contact.
Yeah.
Here, you take the ball.
Yeah.
Very, very unfortunate. 4 first, and he dropped a touchdown pass too. Yet I think he had a great stat line in that game. And then, of course, 90, they got way behind Washington, kind of rallied. There was a little bit of excitement there with Matt Rogers and company. And then, of course, the McCaffrey game. So what do you think, Scott? 85 for 86 game for you?
Yeah, it's 85, 86. I mean, that season was special. And and for fans of our age and where we grew up, I mean, when you had kind of the combination of the Bears in 85 and Iowa in 85, Iowa being number 1, the Bears being undefeated as long as they were. And it just felt, it was a special fall. And the Ohio State loss, of course, stands out because they were number one in the country and they lost that game. And then they still had a chance to win the national title going into the Rose Bowl if they played well. And that was a team that, had dominated throughout the course of the year and had to, one of the, probably the greatest game in Kinnick Stadium history, the 12-10 victory over Michigan. I mean, came down to the end and, 1 versus 2 and that didn't work, that worked out for Iowa. And so the disappointment, the fumbles, to this day, you ask anybody who watched that game, Chad, all of them think that he threw the game, and I'm not accusing him of it. But it's, there is some coincidental moments. And I think that's something that for Iowa fans, I mean, you can't put a tag on that heartbreak, because that was, again, the best team that they had under Caden for sure. And probably in Iowa since the Evie year, since 1960. And yet, you finish 10th in the country. You have a 17-point loss. But then there were other issues too in that game. The run defense was not good.
No,
I mean, they let Eric Ball, Jock Robinson, Eric Ball. You know these names.
Christian McCaffrey. Although, he's still a name, but yeah,
he's still a pretty good player.
I don't know what Eric Ball ever did, but someone in my text group said they should name Eric Ball honorary captain at UCLA this week. wherever he is, bring him back. Yeah, Ronnie Harmon's stat line in that game was 14 carries for 55 yards. Obviously had the 4 fumbles. He did have 11 catches for 102 in that game. So Hayden kept him in there. That was the thing. Yeah. Anyway, 45-28 loss. But yeah, let me read a few. Go ahead. I'm going to look up some responses.
Absolutely. If you want to look up the responses, I'll just I did him pulling up kind of the box score from this game. And again, I don't know. Were you at home when you watched this, or do you remember where you were?
Yeah. Actually, my parents went to the game, and so I was watching it with my aunt and uncle, and we went to like a party where someone had a big screen. Back then, like someone had a big screen in like their basement, like as big as you can get at that time. I think it might have been a projector, even one of those things. Oddly, you wouldn't believe they had it back then, but they did. It was really cool. But yeah, it was. Imagine that today. Your team's 3 in the country, and one player has 4 first half fumbles. And if you look at those fumbles, man, like 2 of them are really bad.
Yeah.
Like he made 2 of them look believable, but 2 of them are, whew.
Yeah.
No contact.
All right. Oof. And, and Eric Ball, he ran for 4 touchdowns. He had a 30-yarder, a 40-yarder, a 6-yarder, and then a 32-yarder. So it was just, they ran for 299 yards, 355 before all of them lost. But so net yardage 299. Whew. So against that Iowa defense, that's actually probably where they lost the game. Yeah. More than they did with Harmon, but we all remember that. And I was at my dad's house. We actually lived in Indianola at the time for a couple of years, so I remember that one. And 81, I was 8. I just turned 8 because you're just a little younger than me. And I remember I was at my grandparents' house in the basement, and it was again disappointing. And then my junior year of high school, though, I was kind of in and out. And it was New Year's Day when as I mentioned that I struggle with Steeple Ridge now because of my past bourbon experience as a teenager. So.
Yeah, I watched the 91 Rose Bowl. I watched with a future Iowa kicker, Brian Hurley. He was in my class at City High. We were best friends. So, we watched that game together with our parents and everything. And there was, that was temper tantrum, Chad. That was my era, really bad era of throwing temper tantrum. I got spoiled with the Bears in 85. And then ever since then, my sports life has sucked, except for the Cubs World Series. But that's why the Cubs World Series meant so much at the time.
I know.
Ever since, Got spoiled when I was young. That's the problem.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, my son, his name's Braden, but we had called him Brady when he was younger, and he liked Tom Brady because of the name. And then the Giants game, the first one that they lost, he went crying, and I'm just sitting there going, "Who are you, man? You're like 8 years old or 7 years old now, and your team's already won 3 Super Bowls, and you're crying over a loss." I'm like, my team's been to 2 Super Bowls in my lifetime. I haven't won in 40 years.
Back in my day, yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, I get an old man shouting at the clouds.
Yeah. All right, so a couple responses actually, just because I liked getting these. Chuck for Heisman says it has to be 85. That's the one we were favored to win. R. Krager says Stanford because I was there. Everything was awesome until kickoff. LOL. Just completely outmatched or outschemed? ? I guess both, but they were dead. I mean, the team was dead from the Michigan State game. Still a month later, you know, like they were just beaten up. That was talk about a car crash. That whole game was a car crash.
Yes, it was the most violent game I've ever seen.
Yeah, and you're not exaggerating. Yeah. This was a good one actually from Josh Sandin because it shows the impact on him. He said the Ronnie Harmon game, that's what he calls it. I was like 4, but the way my dad talks about it, it still haunts me. Yeah, it's true though. It's true. Well, and that predominantly the 85. But go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say. I mean, this is why people would listen to us. Why they watch the games. It's personal. There's a personal attachment to this and how it makes you feel. And when teams win, teams play well, are exciting, which I think this team is starting to be there, the current one. And when a team reaches that upper echelon and they don't win, I mean, there's a difference between like the women's team against South Carolina because you know what, they ran into a better team that day, and they were frankly a better team, but they played well for the most part. There's really, maybe the LSU one was a little more frustrating in that regard, but with Iowa playing UCLA, you felt like this wasn't the team I'd watched all year. This wasn't their best effort. They were so much better than this. And to get up on that stage, and you just want to see the coronation. You won the Rose Bowl. And if they would have finished number 2 in the country behind Oklahoma, so be it. But Iowa fans haven't had that chance. Only really against Georgia Tech do you have that kind of a culmination to a season. And the Orange Bowl is great, but it's still not the Rose Bowl.
Yeah. Where did Iowa finish 10th in the AP poll that year? So they, that loss took them from second. They would have been second, I think, if they won to 10th. So, that hurts. It does. So you're right. That Orange Bowl team in the Fry Ferentz era, that Orange Bowl team is the highest finishing team at 7.
Yeah.
So what could have been? Matt Myers says the 1986 Rose Bowl, no question. My 11-year-old self struggled for days afterwards. So he was about our age. That team was so much fun to watch. Great answer there. A lot of Stanford replies because a lot of our listeners were there. I mean, remember how many Hawk fans were there, Scott? Man,
like 50,000 or something.
And it was so dejecting not to even be in that game for all those fans because the experience was great. Everyone who went, for the most part, had a great experience. I remember my mom and dad went to that game too. For a lot of people, it was like, we're never going to get to go again, right? They're in their 70s now. And my mom got to meet Ed Podolak, right before, it was like, her favorite, basically her icon. And it was great. It was just like a great day. And then the stupid game, 35-0 at halftime.
Yeah.
And then it went to 38-0. And then Iowa got a couple late TDs or it would have been a lot worse.
Yeah.
It was unfortunate. And a lot of people were upset too that Akram Wadley didn't play more in that game and Jordan Canzeri started. And anyway, there's just a lot of answers in the thing that there's some scar tissue from that, Scott.
But you're absolutely right. And there were so many people that I know that talked to that was their Christmas. That okay, we're not really giving out any gifts, but because we're all going to go to the Rose Bowl, we want to celebrate, enjoy the team, enjoy the surroundings. that, whether it's, hey, this isn't going to happen again in our lifetime, or we don't know when, let's just go out and make sure it happens. Especially now in a playoff era, you're not guaranteed any of this. So they were excited about going, and then for it to end so abruptly, like just not compete. And, a lot of them were slipping and sliding, and, the first play with McCaffrey, 75 yards, and then the punt return. And then, what Stanford's band did at halftime, was really disrespectful. And, and I know running into some fans on at LAX the next day, it was just kind of the same. They're all like, man, couldn't they have at least just played well? I think they would have tolerated a loss, probably like the 1991 game, but not like that. That 45-16, and it was really like, they scored, 16 points like late, that it just didn't sit well with people. Right.
And so that's kind of what we're talking about here. Even though it's just a regular season game, there are not playoff implications in this game. That's why I like what we just talked about. Like, I thought that in my head, but now after we've talked about it, like, I feel it even more. Like, it would mean like, I bet there's gonna be 20,000 Iowa fans there, something like that. Maybe it's not that high, but I wouldn't be surprised. Like, I know a lot of people going to this game from the Midwest, let alone all the LAI club people and all that on the West Coast. So I think this is a pilgrimage for a lot of people. Even in the new Big Ten, you're only going to play there once every 4 years. So it's not like you're going to be out there every year. So anyway, want to talk about the game now?
Yeah, we might as well. I mean, they are going to play an opponent that's playing a little bit better.
Exactly. So the first question I have, Scott, for you is which force wins out on Saturday? Iowa's number 10 ranked rush offense or UCLA's number 11 rushing defense? Now, UCLA's pass defense is not good, but they were good. They were the number 2 rush defense in the country last year. I couldn't believe that when I saw that. So it must not be a fluke. So what do you think?
It's better defense than people give it credit for. And they did have a very difficult schedule to start the season, and they're getting better. Last year, they won 8 games, I think. They beat USC at the end. I mean, so they had a decent season overall, and they did run the ball better than they did this year. I think this is a Tim Lester game to me. This is the game where he has to scheme something. Because if you just run it into the line, as good as Iowa's offensive line is playing, that's just not going to be an effective strategy, for 4 quarters, certainly in the first half. Maybe as things change after halftime, they could kind of do some things. But they have Jay Toa is a really good interior defensive lineman. He's going to be a challenge for whoever's head up with him or tries to block him. And then Carson Schlesinger is kind of like a Josie Jewell, Micah McFadden type of linebacker. He is really good. And, he's kind of the salt of the earth type. I think he was a walk-on when he came. And he's really a tough player. So I think Iowa's going to have to figure out how do you leverage the running game to get, people open and then move the ball effectively. It could be laterally through the air and letting them make things happen. But how do I think the bootleg game has to be effective here because they're going to key on Caleb Johnson. They're going to stack the line of scrimmage. They just watched the game 2 against Wisconsin. And then after that, you're going to have to counterpunch off that. So this is a Tim Lester game for me.
I like that. I like the bootleg. We haven't really seen a ton of that from Brendan Sullivan yet. We've seen more scrambles, more RPOs for his runs. Haven't seen as much bootleg, like you said. We saw a little bit on that Pascuzzi 40-yard catch 2 weeks ago against Northwestern. Right. Yeah, worked pretty well. Yeah. So I like it. I like it, Scott. I'm going to keep going with the Iowa rush offense in these matchups because it has been very impressive to me what this offensive line has done, and additionally what the receivers are doing as blockers. Jacob Gill continues to be a tremendous blocker on the edge of almost every time Caleb Johnson goes on a 20-yard touchdown run or longer. You see a Jacob Gill block somewhere in there. So I do lean that way because one of the stats, I was going through UCLA's game by game, and it is impressive. I mean, yes, they're 3-5. It's a 5.5 point spread. Iowa's favored. But they've lost to 4 top 15 teams, Scott, including number 1 Oregon, and who we think is an underranked Indiana team. They've lost at Penn State. It wasn't that uncompetitive. They actually held Penn State below 100 rushing yards in that ball game. And then they've lost to 6-3 Minnesota in a game they really should have won. Like that, they kind of blew that game at the end. So where I was going with this is when you look at the stats, there has yet to be a team that's really committed to the run all the way against them. Indiana, I think, rushed it less than 30 times.
They didn't have to.
I know.
That was a killer. I watched that whole game. So but that was early in the season too.
Yeah. And
they were not very good.
Even Rutgers, didn't run the ball enough. I mean, they have Kyle Monengai, and they kind of got away from the run. Now, I know UCLA got out to a lead. So I think that's why I pick Iowa's rush game here. Anything else you're watching in this one? What do you think about where things stand with Sullivan? I feel like this is a big game for him. I mean, Cade McNamara is out. So it feels like if he plays well, the rest of the season's probably his, right?
It should be, Chad. I mean, I wouldn't imagine if you're Kirk Ferentz, it would if you go out and you play well and you win by double digits and play well doing it, I think your team's got 100% of confidence in your quarterback, and it'd be like, well, why are you making this change? Do you really believe that this team's going to be better? Now he has the opportunity and the time to take a look at it because they'll have 15 days off before they go to Maryland. But I think, there are deficiencies to what Brendan Sullivan can do, but they've been masked pretty good, against these teams. And I would think that he's definitely deserving of it. Now, one thing I do want to kind of point out here is they're ranked last in the country in rush offense at 133. Or, well, maybe that's second to last. Maybe there's 134 now. Last year was 133. And, and scoring offense are 126. So those are numbers that against this defense, you're going to get opportunities. And, quarterback Ethan Garbers is a good playmaker who makes mistakes. So not to the level of Aiden Childs athletically, but he's really inconsistent that way, and he's a decent, passer, but, he's thrown 9 interceptions. And so if they're not going to be able to run the football effectively and Iowa forces them to pass, that's where Iowa's been in a really good spot. So it does behoove them to figure out a way to move the ball down the field, not necessarily slamming, I was going to say Caleb Johnson into the line because that's what he reminds me of so many times. But if you can get a 10-0 lead against this team, I think then you got them in your trap, which is what Iowa's been most effective at over the years, which is, all right, now they have to pass. Okay, we got them because then we can let them come to us.
So I want to say the biggest danger is something you just touched on here is falling behind because we don't know a lot about, whether Brendan Sullivan can bring a team back. Now, it didn't really seem like Cade McNamara could either, so I'm not saying that. But on the flip side, Scott, like Tim Lester's halftime adjustments have been out of this world this season. You think back to the Minnesota game, and I mean, just almost every game they've been a second half team. I mean, even the opener, right? It was 6-0 at the break. They won 40-0. So, what was the other? Where was the one recently? Washington, was that it? Took it to them in the second half, and
Northwestern for sure.
Yeah. So pretty much every game, even Michigan State, the loss. I mean, was
except for Iowa State, and Ohio State. Right. Ohio State was just mistakes. I mean, that really crushed them. I mean, Cade's interception was bad. The 2 strip sacks, I thought one of them was on him. One of them was probably on the line. Those things happen. But I like what he's done and what he's done all year. I mean, you can't help but like it. Granted, okay, passing offense is one of the worst in the country. so what? You're 10th in the nation in run offense. You'll take that if you're Iowa, because that establishes your dominance and the way this line's playing. I think Iowa will be fine, even though this is one of the better rush defenses in the country. You may not run for 200 yards, but I think they can be effective. And we know once Caleb Johnson breaks the line, he is really tough to corral, and he can get off to the races. He's got 20 runs of 20-plus yards, which leads the country by 5, and he's within shouting distance, really, of the last 6 or 7 years of being in, having the most there. So he's special, and this line is allowing him to bring that out. So I like Iowa quite a bit. I mean, like turnover margin, UCLA is 107th in the country. Yeah. Iowa's 10th, red zones, they're bad.
Third down conversion defense, they're real bad.
They're 118th in penalties. 118th in penalties. So all these numbers remind me a lot of Michigan State.
I know. That's what's scary.
But so have they learned from that experience? My guess is yes. Mm-hmm. This is a team that if you allow them to get confidence, they will. But Iowa's going to have, I'll say this, I think Iowa might have up to a half of the fans in the Rose Bowl.
Yeah, I agree. Do you think there's a Rose Bowl, I don't know, effect? I mean, for fans there is. It's like, God, we never win here, like last time we saw the Hawks play there, they're slipping all over the field. I asked Jay Higgins, are you going to wear special shoes? He's like, nope, wear my regular shoes. I didn't ask him that. Tom did. Yeah. But yeah, I was like, I don't know. You might want to take the spikes, buddy. But just go watch the Christian McCaffrey game if you have time, and maybe you'll pack an extra pair of shoes. But do you think there's any like Rose Bowl like effect, time zone effect that's been a factor in the Big Ten this year? What do you think about that for Iowa? Short week.
I think the short week might have a little more impact, but I don't think of it that way. I think for Iowa going west is different than for Rutgers or Maryland, and Maryland's got to go to Oregon, bless their hearts. But with Iowa going out west, it's not like the Arizona games, which were just horrible for that team, because first of all, it's like 105 at kickoff. One of them was on my birthday. It was in September, and it was like 105 at kickoff, and it was 9:30 Central Time, 7:30 out there. This is 6 o'clock at 8. So I don't think the time is going to be that big. The weather isn't going to be an issue like when they go to Florida or Arizona, where I don't know what the temperature is going to be, but I'd imagine it's temperate because it's Southern California, and they're just in the airplane, an extra hour than when they go to Maryland. So I don't know, 3.5 hour flight instead of a 2 and 15 flight. They'll survive. They're in good shape, So
all right.
It's not like having an 11 o'clock kickoff on Iowa body time, like what Rutgers experienced, or a 9 a.m. kick, like when Washington goes east. Those are the extreme ones. I think they do have to change next year.
Yeah, no question. All right, well, we want to thank Steeple Ridge Bourbon for their continuous support of Legends and Listeners, and I'm sure a lot of people out there had reasons for a tall pour this week, from farm to bottle, whether you were celebrating or depressed. From farm to bottle, Steeple Ridge brings a high-quality, delicious drinking, award-winning craft bourbon. If you don't find Steeple Ridge Bourbon at your local grocery store or local liquor store, alcohol store, God, what the heck, liquor store, or tailgate, ask for it by name. Steeple Ridge is distilled, aged, and bottled in Iowa at Lonely Oak Distillery. I wonder if they have Steeple Ridge in Pasadena or LA. I don't know. I'll find out, I guess.
Yeah.
I doubt it. I highly doubt it, but you never know. If I asked for it, what if they pulled it out? I said, ask for it by name.
Ask for it by name.
Oh, yeah, we got a Steeple Ridge.
It's like a Destiny's Child special. Say my name. Here comes the Steeple Ridge.
So Big Ten action this week. Not the greatest slate of games this week, Scott. I guess. I mean, Minnesota Rutgers is like the NBC game. I know it's an early game, but still, like, And then Purdue at Ohio State is the big noon game. Man, this is not a good week for the TV contract. I think UCLA Iowa might be the best matchup, honestly, of the weekend. Like I'm not Michigan and Indiana.
Michigan, Indiana.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's got some interest because I think this is the first time since 1968 that Indiana's actually favored against Michigan.
Wow.
So that's kind of it's got some interest to it. But this is a weird week for a lot of reasons. One is Penn State wanted its whiteout, and they're crying about this now too, which is like that's the Penn State way. And this week it's, well, why is it on Peacock? Well, you wanted a night game. Well, and NBC is showing, NBC is showing the Florida State Notre Dame game in prime time, which kind of wrecks everything. And they wanted it to be at night. And so, okay, you got it, but it's going to be on, and they're like, well, why can't it be on FS1? Well, they've got 3 Big 12 games that day. Ohio State is the ratings juggernaut. And this one's like watching a car wreck. I mean, Purdue is the worst team in the league, and it's not close. And I mean, Ohio State's a 38-point favorite. This could be really bad. And so people might tune in to just say, hey, can they get to 70? I mean, that's legitimately the game. And then the Minnesota Rutgers game was just the last pick of the week. And so then NBC's like, okay, well, we're going to show that's our TV pick because they get 2 if they want them some weeks, Peacock and NBC. So who knows? Maybe Peacock will be Maryland, Iowa.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it could be. Yeah, we'll find out Monday, I guess, right, on that one. Interesting.
Yeah.
Any idea what time that game would? Yeah. Any idea what time the Maryland game might kick? You're usually on to these things.
They've got there's a weird couple of a weird week coming up, Chad, on some of these Big Ten schedules. And the week that Iowa's off, I mean, some of these games to kickoff times, like Michigan State, Illinois, has a 1:30 local kickoff time.
What?
Which I think is perfect, right?
Yeah.
And Rutgers at Maryland has a 5, or for us, it's 6 for them kickoff time. So it's really hard to say what that one will end up being because Indiana, Ohio State, my guess is probably Fox, right? You would probably think that's a big noon,
If they have the first pick, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. The next best game, I would say, just thinking, might be USC, UCLA, or Wisconsin, Nebraska for brand recognition. Mm-hmm. One of those two. Penn State at Minnesota is probably,
that's a good 2,
game.
3, 4. Yeah.
And then,
I mean, so Penn State's in playoff contention. Obviously, they are in playoff contention. That could be at Minnesota. I could see that being a second pick, maybe.
Yeah, and if Minnesota wins against Rutgers, they could be in the 7-8 win range because they're 6-3 now, and so that could be a really important game. So based on that, Iowa Maryland looks like maybe the 5th best game, which puts it right in the middle of Peacock territory. So,
oh boy.
So if that's the case, I could see it, and I hope for all of you out there. My son's actually moving to DC tomorrow, so maybe him too. That it, maybe it would kick off at like, early or mid afternoon at the latest.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll find out together probably early next week. I doubt that'll be a 6-day window game, right? You would think.
I doubt it. I mean, the only thing I can think of with that is, I mean, we know that whoever has number 1 is going to be like, we've got Indiana, Ohio State. Mm-hmm. And then, do you want Penn State at Minnesota? I bet Penn State, Minnesota be number 2, don't you?
Yeah.
Just because they're a team battling for the playoff. And Minnesota is pretty good. They're actually better than Wisconsin or Nebraska right now. And USC, UCLA sounds like to me that could be a Fox special for Fox After Dark.
Yeah. They could go quadruple header, maybe.
Yeah.
Put Wisconsin, Nebraska on NBC and then throw USC, UCLA at like 9 o'clock our time.
Yeah.
Something like that. 10 o'clock our time. I mean,
yeah. Then it'd be Iowa, Maryland, and Illinois Rutgers battling for.
yeah.
I would guess that Iowa, Maryland would be on Peacock, and Illinois Rutgers would either be on
BTN.
BTN, yeah, BTN or maybe FS1, but probably more BTN.
Okay.
If Fox or FS1 has the late game that night.
Yeah, right. Yeah, maybe it's FS. Yeah, I like hearing you talk about TV because we get asked that all the time. When are we going to find out the game time?
Yeah,
people care about that, obviously, for good reason.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's it. I get to go to LA here. I'll probably be in the air while you guys are listening to this Thursday morning. We're recording this on Wednesday because I have an early flight. So looking forward to it. We'll miss you out there, Scotty.
Yeah, I'll miss it too.
Yeah. But it should be fun. I think Iowa wins. I think it's going to be close, though. I think it's going to be close.
Yeah.
Not going to cover, but going to win.
Okay. That's a 6-point spread. I can see it at somewhere in the neighborhood of, I think for some reason I'm stuck on the number 27 for Iowa. Mm-hmm. And I could see 17, 21, 20, 24, somewhere in that range. I do think that this is a closer game than what Iowa's had lately because UCLA may be 3-5, but as we said, I mean, that 4-game stretch, the only school that has a similar type of schedule is unfortunately Purdue. But I mean, when you go from Indiana, LSU, Oregon, Penn State, and then Minnesota's not easy either. I mean, that is treacherous, and so, they, to their credit, they won 2 road games, one in Rutgers and then at Nebraska.
Yeah.
So I think they're going to play hard, but this team seems so confident, Chad. I mean, I think the players, I think Kirk even feels confident. So I like where they're at right now. I think
so. Last question. Nebraska, are they going to be bowl eligible or not? They are really flirting with this thing, Scott. I can't believe it's even in question, but they finish at USC, home against Wisconsin, at Iowa. There's not a gimme in there, but they should beat Wisconsin, right?
Yeah, I think they win. USC's tougher at home than they are on the road. I think that could be a shootout, but I think they might lose. I think they beat Wisconsin based on what we saw the other day. Now, they could play better, of course, because they couldn't play worse. I think they win at home. They beat Wisconsin. They win the greatest trophy of the Big Ten, the Freedom Trophy. It was either Freedom or Liberty. Let's flip a coin. What should we name it? Freedom. Freedom, Liberty. You're not going to pick up something fun. Let's just pick a buzzword, but no, I think they win that, and they're.
Wouldn't it be something if they came to Kinnick again 5-6? Like it seems like they come there every year 5-6. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, that would really be a kick in the whats for them because they haven't been able to handle this very well, and there's a lot. If that happens, then I think Matt Rule's on the hot seat.
Wow. Wow.
I would think so. I mean. If 2 years in a row you've had a chance for multiple games to get to a bowl game and you're not, you can't. There's no progress to be made. There's a lot there that you really let go. So, but I think they get it done before that. I think they do, and in fact, I have a prediction thing on bowls and stuff coming out on Thursday.
Okay,
and I have them in the Music City Bowl.
Oh, Scotty's spoiling it. Scotty spoiler. All right. Well, check out Scott's work at The Athletic. Check out my work at hawkcentral.com from Pasadena this weekend. And for Scott Dochterman, Chad Leistikow, as always, we thank you for joining us on Legends and Listeners here from the Channel Seed Studios and only on the Iowa Everywhere Network.